Hey, good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Taylor Kemp, and I'm on staff here at the Bridge Church. And just before we jump into the message this morning, I want to encourage you to do three things. I want to encourage you to connect, I want to encourage you to give, and I want to encourage you to engage. All right, so the first thing we want you to do is if you're new with us, or maybe you've been attending online for a little while, but you just haven't had a chance to do this, we want to encourage you to go to our website, thebridgechurchcc.com, right, and find a little button on the main page that says connect. So it's going to take you to our welcome card where you can fill that out, and this way we can get to know you a little bit and maybe help you plug into our family here in Charles City. And the second thing I want to encourage you to do is to give. So here at the Bridge Church, we talk a lot about how if we're believers in Jesus, it is our responsibility to give and be generous towards others and to our local church as well. And so God has been so unbelievably, absolutely generous to us and in everything that we have. And so we believe we need to also make sure that we are being generous back to Him. And so we want to encourage you again, go to our website, thebridgechurchcc.com, find a little button in the top right-hand corner. It says giving, sign up and start giving to your local church today. And then finally, we want to encourage you to engage. So as you're joining us online, it's easy to just set it and forget it. Get the message going, you can get the live stream up and running, and then do our thing. So we want to make sure that we build community online, and so that's what church is really about. It's about community and fellowship, and that comes with you engaging and interacting through the chat box. So talk to your hosts, talk to other people online, and try to do the best that you can to get to know one another and see what God has for you through building connections and fellowship. Once again, the message is going to start soon, but we're so glad that you're joining us, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you someday in person. God bless.
Morning, Bridge Church. How we doing? Hey, if we haven't met, my name's Tim, and I'm privileged to work with like 30 different churches across the two-state area of Iowa and Minnesota, and we live here in Charles City. This is my home church, and Rob lets me preach once in a while. So how cool is that for me? So this morning, I'm going to do the other side of a coin of a sermon I did here back in 2019. Rob asked me to preach a sermon as part of a family series, marriage series that we were doing back then. That message was called Before You. Class Christian, some people are called to singleness. Don't rush into something. But the second part of that message was, okay, if you're going to be married, here are some things that you need to think about before you get into that. Now, this message is the other side of that coin. This is for married people. And the title of this message is Before You Say I Quit. And these are some things to think about if you're discouraged in your marriage. It's hard. We're thinking about cashing it in. I want you to understand a few things. Now, before I get into this, let me say this. This is a hard topic. That's why I'm up here and not Rob, because he's a big chicken. It's only partly true. And I understand that many of you have gone through divorce. Might not have been your choice. Maybe you look back and say, man, if I had it to do over again, I'd do this, et cetera, et cetera. I have no desire to make you feel beat up if you've been through divorce. And if you haven't gone through divorce personally, let's face it, divorce has touched every single one of our lives. Is that true? If you have not gone through it personally, someone you love has. A son or a daughter or a parent or a good friend. And so it affects all of us. And so I want to deal with this subject compassionately, while at the same time recognizing that divorce is never God's ideal for his children. Sometimes there are concessions, but it's never his ideal. And so I want to deal with this subject compassionately, but not apologetically. I remember when I was much younger, the very first time that I ever tackled this subject, when I was a pastor in South Dakota, I did approach it apologetically. And I had a lady that came marching up to me afterwards, and she had been through not a divorce, but divorces. And she marched up to me, and I thought, oh boy, here it comes. And she looked up at me, a little bitty short gal. And she said, don't you ever apologize for preaching God's truth. And then she said this, and I never thought about it. She said, divorced people, more than anybody, understand why God hates divorce. And that made a lot of sense to me. And she said, we have been through the pain and the heartache of it. And so if you can save marriages by preaching the truth, you do that. And that conversation liberated me a bit. So let's talk about this. So how can something that starts out so right end up so wrong? You know, it's like one guy, he said, you know, when we were first married, we were so happy. But then as we were leaving the church, okay, some of you a little slow. You're going to have to pick up your game if you're going to stay with me. So let's start here. I want to talk about some of the real reasons that we get to that place where we're ready to say, okay, I give up, okay? And when I say real reasons, these are real reasons. Because I get it. Everybody faces challenges. We all have personality differences, right? We all face financial stresses. We all, we just deal with all that stuff. Everybody does. But what are the underlying causes? And I've got a few I want to run by you and encourage you to think about. And the reason I want you to think about this and these real reasons is to help you move past that temptation to think, okay, the next relationship's going to be better. Because it won't be better if you take these things with you into the next relationship, okay? A new relationship is usually not the fix that you hope it is. So here are several things I've seen over the years. One is unresolved issues. Here's the deal. You need to understand that when you get married, I think we're a slide behind here, unresolved issues. So I don't mean to wake you up back there. When you get married, you do not begin, I think our computer froze. Is that a Mac? Well, see, that's what you get. Here's the deal, and we've got to accept this. When we get married, we do not begin with a clean slate. We each bring stuff into the relationship. Have you discovered that yet? You bring a history to that marriage, and it may be a wonderful family history, where marriage was beautifully modeled for you, and et cetera, et cetera. It might be a horrible history. Fact of the matter is, for most of us, it's a mixture. We bring a mix of good and bad into the relationship. So I want you to understand this. Marriage usually doesn't cause the problems, it reveals them. That's a very, very important concept. Usually doesn't cause, it reveals. Marriage brings to the surface stuff that was already there. Example. Dawn and I have very different backgrounds. We're very different people. We've been married. If you haven't met her, you're lost because she's the best part of this whole deal. And we celebrated 47 years of marriage this year. About 42 happy years. I came from a family that argued constantly. That was my norm. I thought that was normal. I thought that conflict was supposed to be a daily part of life. Because somehow my parents fought every day of their lives and managed to stay married. I'm not sure how. Dawn came from a family that wouldn't yell if the house was on fire. And they avoided conflict like a plague. So how do you think that went for us? Yeah. I mean, it took us years to figure out how to have healthy conflict. And years to figure out that there is such a thing, okay? So when you get married and you begin that process of two becoming one flesh, it brings that stuff to the surface. By the way, married people, this is part of God's plan to sanctify you and make you holy. This is part of God's plan to knock off the rough edges and make you into the image of Jesus. He uses marriage to bring these things to the surface so that you're forced to deal with them. Okay, so does that make sense? Unresolved issues. Here's the second one. Unmet expectations. I don't know any area where we have higher expectations than marriage. I mean, it is nuts. So, the lovely maiden is swept off of her feet by Prince Charming, and they get on his white horse and ride off to live happily ever after. And it's all make-believe. There is no Prince Charming. Ladies, I don't care what he told you. He is still a frog. Don't laugh, women. You're probably no princess either. So I want you to understand this principle. A marriage is the union of two flawed, imperfect people. Is that true? So if marriage is made up of two flawed, imperfect people, it doesn't take a graduate degree in psychology to figure out that any union between these two flawed, imperfect people will be what? Flawed and imperfect. We also idealize, we not only idealize that spouse thinking we're marrying Prince Charming or Cinderella or whatever, we idealize what marriage is. Most of marriage, single people, I'm going to do you a favor. Most of marriage is not romance and flowers and love notes and fantastic sex. Marriage is going to work doing 20 loads of laundry a week, potty training a toddler who is totally disinterested in the whole process, replacing the transmission, trying to figure out how to come up with the money to replace the transmission, disciplining children, and dropping into bed at night exhausted. You will not have another wedding in this church now for at least a year. No, I don't want to overstate it, because marriage, if God is in it, can be fantastic, and it's worth it. And in fact, it is pulling together through all of that stuff that binds you. But you don't get married thinking it's going to make you happy and complete. You do not get married thinking this is going to be the answer. Okay? Here's another one. Unforgiven hurts. This is a big one. We've already established the fact that we're very different, we're flawed and imperfect, and we bring stuff into the relationship. So it's a no-brainer that in marriage we are going to hurt each other. Yes? Absolutely. And you cannot have a good marriage if you don't learn how to forgive. If you hang on to stuff, you are doomed. If you are hanging on to stuff, hoping for some kind of justice, you're in a world of hurt. So I want you to understand this principle, and I've seen this over and over and over again. Many of our marriage problems are the result of accumulated offenses. We hold on to them, they accumulate, they build up like a big old pile of garbage. And they poison us, and they poison our relationship. I've been in counseling situations with couples who are in conflict, and I find them bringing up stuff that happened years ago. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? Did you just do that? Did you just go there? Did you just bring up something from 8 years ago that you haven't forgiven him for yet? You've let it pile up and accumulate that long. No wonder your marriage is in trouble. Forgiveness has to be a part of a healthy relationship. One more in this area, and I wish I had time to do a whole sermon on this, but I don't. Unwillingness to love each other the way God designed. This is big. This is really important to understand that generally speaking, God has created men and women very, very differently with different emotional needs, and there are different things that fill our love tank. And you can see it all summarized in Ephesians 5:33. Each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Here it is in a nutshell. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. Do you know that nowhere in Scripture does it command women to love their husbands? Do you know why that is? Because that's what you do. Women, you're hardwired. You are nurturers. You care. You relate. Women love to love. But men are under divine command to love your wives, because it doesn't come as easily for us. Am I in a safe enough space where I can say that? I mean, we feel it. We just have a hard time showing it. We have a hard time showing it to our wives. We have a hard time showing it to our kids. I remember Dawn and I had already been married maybe, a dozen years. We were going to visit her folks. And she said, sometimes I struggle with whether my dad loves me. he's not affectionate. He doesn't say, I love you. And I said, okay, here's the deal. When we go visit them, before we leave, he's going to come out and he's going to check the tread and the inflation on our tires. He's going to ask me if I've checked the oil, and he's going to hand you money. And with each one of those things, he's doing the best he can do to say, I love you. And he followed that script like I was holding a gun to his head. And some of this might be a generational thing, maybe not, but men have trouble. They feel it, but they have trouble showing it. And so God says, listen, guys, I don't care if it doesn't come naturally. Show tenderness. Shut off the TV and listen. Have a conversation. But wives, this is interesting. You're not commanded to love your husbands. You're commanded to respect him. And again, I wish I had time to get into this. But Jesus, just as Jesus commands your husband to love you, he commands you to respect him. Why is that? Because generally speaking, and I'm painting with broad brushstrokes here, certainly there's overlap. Generally speaking, a woman's primary emotional need is security. To feel loved, to feel safe. But a man's primary emotional need is significance. To feel like I'm important, to feel like I matter, to feel like I'm competent. And so the way God created us, he created us with this cycle that as a husband loves his wife, lays down his life for her, she finds it very, very easy to show him the respect and to not only say, I love you, but you're the best. You're amazing. And that fills his tank, and a man can't help loving a woman like that. A man will jump in front of a truck for a woman like that. And there, I'm just telling you something. We have a generation of women who need to understand you can get everything you want from your relationship by respecting your husband. Not nagging, not being critical. Okay, I'm going to get in trouble here. We have a couple of problems in this love and respect area. One is that radical feminism has taught us that to submit to and respect your husband means you're saying that you're inferior to him. That is not the case, not in any way, shape, or form. But here's another problem. And I can hear some of you right now, well, he has to earn my respect. Don't raise your hand, but have you ever said that? He has to earn my respect. And I'm just telling you, that's a double standard. Because we Christians trumpet the idea of unconditional love, and we're supposed to love. Has anybody here ever behaved in an unloving manner? Have you ever behaved in a way where you don't deserve to be loved? Yeah, there you go. But he's supposed to love you anyway. Why do we have a different standard for respect? I mean, we can still make a choice. I know we men do stuff that doesn't deserve respect. I get it. But you can find something that deserves it. Just like he can find something that makes him love you. So here's the deal. I talked about that wonderful cycle, but here's the deal. An author named Emerson Eggerichs calls this the crazy cycle. And when we get into the crazy cycle, men, here's what happens. Men who don't feel respected shut down emotionally. And they withdraw. They pull back. And they hold back the love their wives are starving for. And this wife who feels unloved withholds the respect he longs for. And so on, so on. Bottom line, love is the emotional air that women breathe, responding on each other's air hoses. So, anyway, those are some of the underlying things, the real reasons that I've seen over the years that lead to getting to the place where you say, I feel hopeless. I give up. And the problem with giving up is the person will usually go into the next relationship carrying those same things. Okay? And I'm not saying there's no hope for the next relationship, but there isn't if we don't recognize and deal with that stuff and own it. Okay, so let's go to the next part of this message. Let's talk about some things to consider when we're tempted to say, I quit. When you get to that place, if you're there right now, I want you to think about these things. We live in a culture that I've already alluded to that tempts us to think that the easiest solution to any problem is to junk it and start over. You know, have you noticed nobody repairs appliances anymore? Because they're cheap. It's just easy enough to junk them. Go to Walmart, buy another microwave. Listen to these words by Robert Taylor in the book, The Art of Staying Together. We now live in an age of disposability. Use it once and throw it away. Over the past decade, there has developed a feeling that relationships are equally disposable. So before you throw it away, I want to give you three things to think about. First of all, consider your commitment to your spouse. Here's the context of this passage we're about to read. Jesus actually has been talking about divorce. And then he says this in Matthew 5, beginning at verse 33. Again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head. You cannot make even one hair black or white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Now, that's fascinating to me that it's in the context of marriage and divorce that he says this and basically says, keep your commitments, keep your promises. Here's the context of this passage. The Jews of that day and age divided oaths into two categories, binding oaths and non-binding oaths, which is a joke. You can read about some of them in Matthew 23. It's like, okay, they said, if you swear by the temple, it's not binding. But if you swear by the gold of the temple, then you're bound to your oath. It's like having your fingers crossed behind your back. Our culture kind of uses the same strategies when it comes to marriage, looking for some kind of loophole. And here's the stuff we were too young. We just didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know each other. We went too quick in the marriage. We're not compatible. We're just too different. In one of my not finer moments of counseling, which is God did not call me to be a counselor, and Dawn and I are as different, and anybody who knows us well, you know we're as different as two people can be. Which, by the way, if you can grow up, gives you a stronger marriage. But you got to grow up and realize that God put this person into your life to make up for your weaknesses. Anyway, that's a different sermon. So I was counseling this couple, and they said, we're going to get divorced. Why are you getting divorced? Well, we're just too different. And I said, shut up. They don't teach you that in counseling class, by the way. And I went on to explain there's no two different people in the world than my wife and I, and it can be wonderful. Anyway, you remember the words you spoke to each other in your wedding? as you stood before God and friends and family, let me refresh your memory. We're going to pull them up on the screen. I take you to be my wedded wife, husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part according to God's holy law, and thereto I pledge you my faith. Sounds kind of permanent, doesn't it? Secondly, consider your covenant with God. Matthew 19. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one. Get this line, therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. For the Christian, marriage is not just a legal contract between two people. It is a covenant among three. It is a cord of three strands: husband, wife, and God. And in his design, makes this wonderful, unbreakable braid. Let me read another part of the marriage ceremony to you. By seeking the ministry of the church, you've expressed your conviction that marriage is more than a legal contract, but rather a bond of union sealed in heaven. Not a contract, a bond. Let us seek the strength and blessing of God who's witnessed and sealed this what? Covenant. Do you catch that? But while we're here, let's talk about the realities of life. There are times when divorce, though it is never God's best plan, because of sin, because of whatever, there are a couple of exceptions, and I just want to touch on them. I think there are two reasons that God says, okay, you can get out of this covenant. Two instances where he allows divorce. It always grieves him, but where he allows it because it may be not his best plan, but the best thing going forward. One of those reasons is adultery. Matthew 5. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce, but I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. By the way, the Greek word used here for marital unfaithfulness is hard to translate. It's not the simple word for adultery, and we wrestle with what it really means, but it seems to carry the idea of a pattern of unrepentant sexual sin. So my take on it is, when it comes to the adultery thing, if a spouse commits adultery and is repentant, I think the very best thing you can do for yourselves, the very best thing you can do to glorify God, very best thing you can do for your children is to forgive and get help and heal and put that thing back together. This passage doesn't seem to carry that idea. It seems to carry the idea of a pattern, unrepentant pattern. And God says you don't have to stay in that. Scripture mentions one more ground, not for initiating divorce, but for allowing it, and that is abandonment by an unbelieving spouse. And you can see that in 1 Corinthians 7. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer and he's willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. So Paul says if you're a believer married to an unbeliever, As long as the unbeliever wants to be in the marriage, you stay. You can't say, oh, I shouldn't have married a non-Christian. That ship has sailed. And he goes on to say that sometimes through the influence of the husband or the wife, that person comes to Christ. But then he says this in verse 15, but if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. Okay? So those two things are the only two grounds for the divorce that Scripture allows. My wife proofread my sermon. It was terrible before she corrected it. And she brought this, she said, are you going to say anything about abuse? And I said, oh, I should, shouldn't I? I don't have time to go into that, but all I can say right now is God would never desire that you stay in a dangerous situation. And we would never counsel you to go back home and get beat up again. Okay? But having said that, divorce may not be the first option. Okay? All right. Nothing. All right. So I touched on that. Next, you need to consider the cost of divorce. Malachi 2:16 says, I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel, and I hate a man's covering himself with violence as well as his garment, says the Lord Almighty. So guard yourself and your spirit and do not break faith. Why does God hate divorce? And it's important. God does not hate divorced people. He hates what divorce does to people. And God hates anything that hurts and damages his children, just like you hate anything that hurts and damages your children. Judith Wallerstein wrote a book called Second Chances, Men and Women and Children, a Decade After Divorce. This is fascinating. Here's what she says. Divorce is deceptive. Legally, it's a simple event, but psychologically, it is a chain. Sometimes a never-ending chain of events, relocations, radically shifting relationships strung through time. There are a few things that I can think of that we need to think through as far as the cost. The first one is the most obvious one and probably the least damaging, but very real nonetheless, and that's the economic impact. Besides the legal costs of going through a divorce, there's the, okay, now we've got to set up and pay for two households. Now we don't have one mortgage. We have two mortgages or two rents. And, you know, we that whole deal. And there are longer-term financial things. The impact on generational wealth is phenomenal. Just as far as couples leaving an inheritance to their children. All of that gets broken up, and it contributes to poverty down the line, generational poverty. There's increased inability to help our kids get a technical school education or college, all of those things. So suffice it to say that the impact economically is very, very real. Probably the biggest one and the thing that breaks my heart most is the negative effect upon children, if there are children involved in the marriage. Listen to this quote from Newsweek. Now listen. This is not Christianity Today. This is Newsweek. The numbers are daunting. There is a high correlation between disrupted homes and just about every social problem imaginable. According to research, more than 80% of the adolescents in psychiatric hospitals come from broken families. Approximately 3 out of 4 teenage suicides occur in households where there's a parent absent. If the intact two-parent family isn't reestablished as the dominant ideal, this is not to lay a guilt trip on you single parents, you're heroic, but if it's not reestablished as the dominant ideal, the effect on our children will be disastrous. That's not Christianity Today, that's Newsweek. And we talk ourselves into, well, you know, it's going to be better for the kids, you know, if we separate so they don't have this conflict. And, you know, and the effects on the children, the insecurity. They're more likely to be sexually active. Creates distrust in their parents. It creates a norm, so they get into their own marriages, and when it gets tough, well, okay, this is the norm. This is what we do. And then one more, I think, is a damaged witness. We Christians are always talking about the power of God and the difference that knowing Jesus makes. So when we talk that power of God and we can't make a marriage work, how does the world translate that? They look at us and say, there's no difference between you and me. That may or may not be fair, but I've just discovered that if we can model healthy relationships, it gives us a platform to draw people to Jesus. It's fascinating that if it comes up in conversation and Dawn or I mention to somebody, we've been married 47 years. There's like this, yeah, and we still kind of like each other. What a platform. Anyway, so I got to wrap this up before I get in too much trouble. Again, I'm trying to preach this compassionately. If I'm not coming across compassionately, please forgive me. That's my desire. Because I realize so many of us have already been hurt by divorce. And the last thing you need today is for me to beat up on you. So here we are. We're discouraged. We're ready to say, I quit. It just seems like the best thing to do. But if I don't want to quit, can you give me some handles? Try these ABCs, not because they're simple, but just help you remember. First of all, accept responsibility for my actions and attitudes. Galatians 6, 4, and 5 in the Living Bible says this, let everyone be sure that he's doing his very best, for then he'll have personal satisfaction of work well done and won't need to compare himself with someone else. Each of us must bear some faults and burdens of his own, for none of us is perfect. Bear your faults and burdens. Listen. I can't control my spouse's actions and attitudes. I can influence them, but I can't control them. In my marriage, there's only one person I can control. Who's that? It's me. And I can choose, because as a follower of Jesus, it is a choice. I can choose to love my wife as Christ loved the church, regardless of what she does. Now, I happen to be very, very lucky because she's very easy to love. I'm not so easy, and the fact that she married down is not my problem. I'm not responsible for my spouse, but I'm responsible for me. And I've worked with couples, and they're like two kids on a playground saying, you go first. Well, I'll respect him if he'll just behave in a respectable manner. Well, you're telling me to love my wife? You don't know what it's like to live with her. So what? Lean on Jesus and make a decision and accept responsibility for yourself. So even if you do end up with the relationship ending, you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I did everything I could. Secondly, believe your marriage can change. Isaiah 59:1 says, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. Matthew 19:26, for with God all things are possible. I just listened to you sing songs about a God who does the impossible. Did you believe it? And then finally, commit to doing whatever it takes. Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. Great marriages do not just happen. You have got to commit yourself to fight for it. The grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. The grass is greener where you water it. It's going to take 3 things just to get you started, if you're willing to do whatever it takes. It'll take honesty. Things aren't good. Let's quit pretending like they are. Let's quit play acting. This is not a healthy situation. We have to admit that we brought things into this relationship that we haven't been willing to deal with. We've let offenses accumulate instead of forgiving. It's going to take honesty. It might take confession of a sin that you've been hiding, that has been robbing energy from your marriage. This is the hard part. It's also going to take humility. I blew it. I sinned. I'll accept responsibility. I do have issues that are damaging this relationship. I'm not responsible for you, but I'm responsible for me, and I'm sorry. And then this one, it will probably take help. Men especially are really bad about this. Come on, guys. We'd rather drive around lost for 3 hours than ask for directions. We're for sure not going to ask for help in our relationships. We can figure it out. I've heard people say that. Don't you think if you could figure it out, you would have by now? Doing what you always done is going to get you what you've always gotten. But counseling is expensive. You think that's expensive? Try a divorce. I asked Dawn permission for what I'm about to say. She said, yeah. There have been different times in our relationship we've sought counseling, unashamedly. Sometimes with a professional counselor, sometimes with just an older mentor. Because we were dealing with something we couldn't get past. We needed help. No shame in that, is there? Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope it's been helpful. If you're struggling in your marriage, I hope I've given you some tools and some encouragement. And if you've been through divorce, I don't want you to feel beat up. God hates divorce, not divorced people. And you are still writing your story. And God loves to redeem things, and He gets the last word. Let me close with this from the author Lewis Smedes. Yes, somewhere there are people who still make and keep promises. They choose not to quit when the going gets rough because they promised once to see it through. They stick to lost causes. They hold on to a love grown cold. They stay with people who have become pains in the neck. They still dare to make promises and care enough to keep the promises they make. I want to say to you that if you have a ship, you will not desert. If you have people, you will not forsake. If you have causes you will not abandon, then you are like God. What a marvelous thing a promise is. When a person makes a promise, she reaches out into an unpredictable future and makes one thing predictable. She will be there, even when being there costs her more than she wants to pay. When a person makes a promise, he stretches himself out into circumstances that no one can control and controls at least one thing. He will be there no matter what the circumstances turn out to be. With one simple word of a promise, a person creates an island of certainty in a sea of uncertainty. And that is the power of a promise. May God bless you.